Something just exploded at one of Russia's most strategically vital military logistics hubs, and the damage is not measured in broken windows or scorched pavement. We are talking about multiple vessels destroyed, fuel infrastructure reduced to burning wreckage, and a supply chain that the Kremlin has spent 3 years quietly depending on now sitting at the bottom of the Black Sea. This was not an accident. This was not a lucky strike. This was a precisely coordinated operation months in the making, and by the time we are done today, you will understand exactly why what just happened in that harbor may represent a turning point Moscow genuinely cannot recover from. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because we cover what the mainstream headlines miss. The strategic logic behind the chaos, the technical details that explain why some explosions matter and others do not. And today, why a series of detonations along the Russian Black Sea coast just changed the mathematics of this entire war. Here is what I am going to show you today. First, we are going to establish exactly why this particular port matters, not just as a dot on a map, but as the beating logistical heart of Russia's entire southern military campaign. Then, I am going to walk you through precisely what happened, what weapons were used, and how Ukraine pulled this off despite Russian layered air defenses that Moscow spent billions constructing. After that, we are going to examine what the destruction of this infrastructure actually means for Russian operational capacity over the next 6 to 12 months. And finally, we are going to talk about the second and third order effects, because this strike is not just about ships. It is about oil revenues, alliance credibility, and whether Vladimir Putin can continue to project an image of invulnerability to a domestic audience that is running out of patience. By the end of this video, you will understand why this explosion is not a headline. It is a strategic verdict. Let us start with context, because none of what follows makes sense without understanding the geography. The Black Sea is not simply a body of water. For Russia, it is an arterial passage, the primary logistical corridor connecting the Russian mainland to occupied Ukrainian territory and to the broader projection of Russian military and economic power into the Mediterranean. Control of the Black Sea, or at minimum the ability to operate freely within it, is not optional for Moscow's war strategy. It is foundational. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, headquartered historically in Sevastopol on the occupied Crimean Peninsula, was designed to enforce that control. Dozens of surface vessels, submarine capability, shore-based missile systems, and logistics infrastructure stretching across multiple ports from Novorossiysk on the Russian mainland to Feodosia in occupied Crimea formed what Moscow considered an impenetrable maritime wall. For the first year of the full-scale invasion that began in February 2022, that wall largely held. Russian surface vessels enforced a de facto naval blockade of Ukrainian ports, preventing grain exports and threatening the Ukrainian coastline. It seemed, at least from Moscow's public posture, that the Black Sea question was settled. Russia had dominance. Ukraine had no navy to speak of. The math was simple. Then Ukraine started doing something that nobody in Moscow's strategic planning community had fully modeled. They built an asymmetric naval capability almost from nothing. Understanding Ukraine's maritime transformation requires appreciating what they were working with. Before the war, Ukraine's naval forces were modest, a collection of patrol vessels, aging infrastructure, and limited blue water capability. After Russia seized Crimea in 2014, Ukraine lost its primary naval base. By 2022, the Ukrainian Navy was an afterthought. That is important context, because what came next was not the product of existing conventional capability. It was improvisation at an extraordinary level of sophistication. Ukraine developed and deployed uncrewed surface vessels, essentially naval drones, at a scale and with a level of effectiveness that rewrote the doctrinal manual on maritime asymmetric warfare. These are not remote-controlled toys. The Magura V5, Ukraine's primary naval drone platform, is a 5.5-meter vessel capable of carrying a 320-kilogram warhead, reaching speeds of approximately 42 knots, and operating at ranges that extend deep into Russian-controlled waters. It uses a combination of satellite navigation, optical guidance, and AI-assisted targeting to navigate toward its objective, even when jamming attempts are made. Multiple Magura V5 units have been confirmed in strikes on Russian Black Sea Fleet assets by open-source intelligence analysis, Ukrainian official statements, and independent verification from satellite imagery providers, including Planet Labs and Maxar Technologies. The results of Ukraine's naval drone campaign between 2023 and 2025 are, by any objective assessment, staggering. According to analysis published by the Royal United Services Institute, Ukraine destroyed or seriously damaged more than one-third of Russia's Black Sea Fleet surface combatants during this period. The flagship of that fleet, the Moskva guided missile cruiser, was sunk in April 2022 by Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missiles, not a drone strike, but the opening statement of a maritime campaign that has never truly stopped. What followed over the next 3 years was a systematic attrition of Russian naval assets that forced the Black Sea Fleet to withdraw from Sevastopol entirely in late 2023, relocating primary operations to Novorossiysk on the Russian mainland. Think about that. Russia was pushed out of its own occupied naval base by a country with no navy, which brings us to Novorossiysk. Novorossiysk is Russia's largest commercial port and a critical military logistics node. It handles a significant volume of Russian oil exports, petroleum and petroleum products that generate the revenue funding this war. It also functions as the primary resupply corridor for Russian forces operating across the Black Sea theater, including the supply of ammunition, fuel, and equipment to forces in occupied southern Ukraine. When Russia relocated Black Sea Fleet assets from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk, it concentrated an enormous amount of strategic value into a single location. And when you concentrate strategic value into a single location, you create a target. Now let us talk about what just happened. The strike complex that hit Novorossiysk was not a single weapon arriving from a single direction. Based on Ukrainian official statements, open-source satellite imagery analysis from firms including Maxar Technologies, and reporting from Reuters, the Kyiv Independent, and multiple Ukrainian defense publications, what occurred was a coordinated multi-vector attack combining naval drone approaches from the sea with aerial drone strikes from separate vectors designed to saturate and overwhelm Russian point defense systems. The tactical signature here is important. Russian air defenses at Novorossiysk include Pantsir S-1 short-range gun missile systems, S-300 batteries providing medium to high-altitude coverage, and electronic warfare systems intended to jam incoming drone navigation. A single-axis attack can be managed by these systems, even if imperfectly. A simultaneous multi-axis attack that forces those systems to engage in multiple directions simultaneously creates gaps. Those gaps are windows measured in seconds, and experienced drone operators know how to thread aircraft through a window that exists for only a few seconds. Ukrainian naval drones approaching from the sea presented one target set for Russian coastal defenses. Simultaneously, aerial FPV drones, fast, cheap, difficult to track on radar due to their small cross-section, approached from different azimuths. The Pantsir systems defending the port cannot effectively engage both simultaneously when the threat vectors are separated by meaningful angles. This is not a theoretical vulnerability. It is a documented operational pattern that Ukraine has exploited repeatedly, and it worked again here. The first confirmed detonation struck fuel storage infrastructure in the port's southern logistics zone. Satellite imagery analyzed by open-source investigators at OSINT Defender and confirmed by Maxar imagery shows multiple large circular fire scars consistent with burning fuel storage tanks in that area. Fuel storage is not a secondary target. Fuel is the lifeblood of mechanized warfare. Without it, tanks do not move, aircraft do not fly, and artillery pieces become expensive lawn ornaments. Every tank of fuel that burns in Novorossiysk is fuel that was never going to reach a Russian armored unit somewhere in eastern Ukraine. The second confirmed impact zone targeted vessels moored in the military section of the harbor. Ukraine's general staff confirmed strikes on 2 landing ship variants, vessel types Russia uses to move equipment and supplies across the Black Sea to logistics points along occupied coastline. The loss of landing ship capacity is not trivially replaced. Russia's overall landing ship inventory in the Black Sea theater has already been significantly degraded by the cumulative campaign since 2022. Each additional loss compresses Moscow's ability to conduct the kind of coastal logistics operations that sustained forces in the south. Now here is where the tactical analysis transitions into something strategically significant. The combined effect of the fuel storage destruction and the vessel kills was not simply additive damage. It was multiplicative disruption. Because Novorossiysk serves as the primary fallback position for Russian Black Sea Fleet assets that already withdrew from Sevastopol, any degradation of its infrastructure forces Russia into an impossible set of choices. Either operate from damaged infrastructure, accepting reduced effectiveness, or disperse assets further east along the Russian coast toward ports like Gelendzhik or Temryuk. But dispersal creates its own problems. The further east you push your logistics chain, the longer and more exposed your supply lines become, and the less effectively you can concentrate force when you need it. Russia is being pushed into a logistical corner, and this strike just pushed a little harder. Let us step back and examine the broader strategic picture, because the immediate military damage is only one dimension of what just occurred. Novorossiysk is not just a military port. As previously noted, it handles a substantial volume of Russian crude oil exports. Russia's energy revenue funds approximately 40 to 50% of its federal budget, according to figures published by the International Monetary Fund and the Russian Finance Ministry itself. Oil export infrastructure is therefore not merely an economic asset. It is the financial engine that makes continued prosecution of this war possible. Every pipeline junction disrupted, every loading terminal damaged, every tanker delayed in port translates directly into reduced Kremlin revenue. Prior to this strike, Western economic analysts at institutions including the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Kiev School of Economics had already documented that Russian oil revenues were under pressure from multiple directions: OPEC production dynamics, enforcement of the G7 oil price cap, and the gradual degradation of Russia's so-called shadow fleet of tankers used to circumvent sanctions. The destruction of fuel storage and port infrastructure at Novorossiysk adds a physical disruption to those financial pressures. When you are already selling oil at a discount through indirect channels to avoid sanctions, the last thing you need is for your export terminal to be on fire. There is another dimension here that rarely receives sufficient attention in mainstream coverage. Russia's war in Ukraine is also an information war directed at a domestic audience. Vladimir Putin has spent more than 3 years cultivating a narrative in which Russia is successfully prosecuting a special military operation, achieving its objectives on a timeline dictated by Kremlin choice rather than battlefield necessity. That narrative requires the appearance of invulnerability at home. Military bases get struck, ships get sunk, bridges get blown, and each time the Kremlin either denies the event, minimizes its significance, or attributes it to NATO aggression rather than Ukrainian capability. But there is a limit to how long that narrative can be sustained when the fires are visible from the Russian shore. Novorossiysk is not in Ukraine. It is not in occupied territory. It is in Russia. The residents of Novorossiysk do not need to watch Ukrainian drone footage to know what happened. They could see the smoke. They could hear the explosions. Russian telegram channels, which function as an informal information ecosystem partially outside direct Kremlin control, lit up with real-time reporting from locals describing the scale of the destruction. State media, by contrast, was silent or issued minimizing statements that were immediately contradicted by the visual evidence spreading across social media. This is the information war dimension that the Kremlin cannot fully contain. Every strike on Russian soil that produces visible, undeniable evidence of damage is a crack in the narrative architecture Putin has constructed. Individually, each crack is manageable. Cumulatively, they erode the foundation. Now let us talk about the weapons and the capability question, because this is where the analysis gets genuinely interesting from a military technology perspective. The combination of Magura V5 naval drones with FPV aerial drones represents a new model of asymmetric precision strike capability that smaller military forces can replicate at a fraction of the cost of conventional naval power. The Magura V5 reportedly costs in the range of several $100,000 per unit, expensive compared to an FPV drone, but extraordinarily cheap compared to the assets it is targeting. A Russian Rapucha-class landing ship represents hundreds of millions of dollars in replacement cost and years of shipyard time. The exchange ratio in Ukraine's favor is not marginal, it is transformational. More importantly, the guidance technology that makes these weapons effective has become increasingly accessible. Ukraine has not built a conventional navy. It has built a distributed, expendable precision strike network that achieves naval effects without conventional naval platforms. This model has attracted intense interest from defense establishments from Taipei to Tallinn, from Vilnius to Canberra. Every NATO partner watching Ukraine's Black Sea campaign is drawing doctrinal conclusions about how small nations with limited defense budgets can challenge the maritime dominance of larger adversaries. Israel's Elbit Systems and Rafael Advanced Defense Systems have both reportedly engaged with Ukrainian operators studying the naval drone model. South Korea's Agency for Defense Development has published analysis of unmanned surface vessel doctrine. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense has made no secret of its interest in asymmetric maritime capabilities, given the threat environment it faces in the Taiwan Strait. What Ukraine has demonstrated in the Black Sea is not just tactically relevant to this specific conflict. It is a proof of concept that is already reshaping how democracies think about maritime defense in an era when adversaries possess numerically superior conventional forces. The specific technical architecture of the Novorossiysk strike, multi-axis saturation designed to overwhelm point defenses, is now documented in open sources and analyzed in detail by organizations including the UK's Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. The Kremlin has, in effect, paid tuition for a masterclass in asymmetric naval warfare that it never agreed to teach. Let us examine the second-order effects on alliance credibility and what this means for the broader geopolitical picture. Russia's continued ability to project credible military power in the Black Sea region was a key component of its deterrent posture, not just toward Ukraine, but toward NATO's southeastern flank, Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria. The Black Sea Fleet was designed in part as a demonstration capability. When the fleet operates freely, it communicates to regional actors that challenging Russian interests in this theater carries unacceptable risk. When the fleet is pushed out of its primary base, loses a third of its surface combatants, and watches its fallback port erupt in flames, that deterrent communication collapses. Turkey occupies a genuinely pivotal position here. As the controlling power over the Turkish Straits, the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, under the terms of the 1936 Montreux Convention, Ankara has blocked Russian naval reinforcements from entering the Black Sea since March 2022, applying the convention's wartime provisions. This decision, maintained consistently by President Erdogan despite complex Turkish-Russian economic relationships, has prevented Moscow from replenishing its Black Sea Fleet losses with vessels from other fleets. Russia cannot bring Black Sea Fleet reinforcements through the Turkish Straits. It cannot bring them overland. Every ship that burns in Novorossiysk stays burned. There is no replacement pipeline. Romania and Bulgaria, both NATO members with Black Sea coastlines, have watched this campaign with close attention. Romanian officials have reportedly accelerated discussions with NATO partners regarding additional maritime patrol capabilities and coastal defense systems. The degradation of Russian Black Sea Fleet capability has reduced the threat environment these countries face, but it has also created new uncertainty about what Russia might attempt as desperation increases. And that is the uncomfortable question that any honest analysis has to address. Because here is where we have to be precise about what we do not know, and what the alternative readings of this situation look like. Russia still possesses significant shore-based anti-ship missile capability, including the Bastion P system with the P-800 Onyx supersonic anti-ship missile, which has an operational range exceeding 300 kilometers. The degradation of Russia's surface fleet does not eliminate its ability to threaten Ukrainian or Western assets in the Black Sea using land-based systems. A fleet that cannot sail may still be able to deny access to others. There is also a legitimate question about escalation dynamics. Ukraine has conducted strikes deep into Russian territory, on oil infrastructure, on military logistics, on radar installations, with increasing frequency and capability. Each escalation has thus far been absorbed without triggering the dramatic Russian response that some analysts predicted. But the logic of escalation is not linear, and the domestic political pressures on Putin to respond more aggressively to visible attacks on Russian soil are real and growing. The strikes at Novorossiysk are not the kind of events that the Kremlin can explain away indefinitely. Russian information operations will characterize this as a NATO operation, pointing to the Western-supplied satellite intelligence and communications equipment that Ukraine uses to conduct these strikes. That framing, while analytically misleading regarding the agency and execution, will resonate with a significant portion of the Russian domestic audience. Understanding the limits of what this strike achieves requires acknowledging that the information dimension of this war is not won by the side with the most accurate strike data. It is contested on multiple levels simultaneously. Additionally, Russia has demonstrated a persistent capacity to adapt to Ukrainian strike campaigns. The withdrawal from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk was itself an adaptation to the naval drone threat. Russia will adapt again, whether through dispersal of assets, hardening of remaining infrastructure, or development of countermeasures to the Magura Vi-5 platform. Ukrainian strike campaigns achieve effects, but they do not achieve permanence. The question is whether the cumulative effect of repeated successful strikes outpaces Russia's adaptive capacity. Based on the trajectory of the last 3 years, the evidence suggests Ukraine has the better of this exchange. But it is not over. It is also worth acknowledging that the full battle damage assessment from this specific strike will take time to verify. Initial reports and satellite imagery provide a snapshot, but the true extent of damage to subsurface infrastructure, the operational status of port facilities after repair attempts, and the actual number of vessels damaged beyond temporary repair. These questions will only be answered by sustained imagery analysis over the coming weeks. Claims of decisive war-winning strikes deserve scrutiny. This was significant. Whether it proves decisive depends on factors still being determined. So where does this leave us, and where is this going? Pull back far enough and the picture that emerges is of a Russian Black Sea strategy that has been systematically unraveled. 3 years ago, Russia controlled Crimea, commanded a credible surface fleet, enforced a naval blockade, and threatened Ukrainian port cities. Today, the fleet is a fraction of its former size, its primary base in Sevastopol was abandoned, its fallback port at Novorossiysk is burning, and Ukraine's grain corridor has been reopened through diplomatic and military pressure that Russia could not ultimately sustain. That trajectory does not mean Russia is finished. It does not mean the war is ending. Russia still occupies significant Ukrainian territory. Its ground forces continue to fight across a wide front, sustaining momentum in some sectors through sheer material commitment regardless of catastrophic losses. The war's outcome will not be determined in the Black Sea alone. But the Black Sea campaign illustrates something important about the larger strategic context. This war is being fought on multiple simultaneous dimensions: kinetic, economic, informational, technological, and Ukraine is demonstrating a capacity to compete effectively in each of them, despite being outmatched in raw size and resources. The naval drone campaign was not funded by a Pentagon program. It was developed by Ukrainian engineers in conditions of active warfare, iterated based on operational feedback, and deployed with enough operational security that it consistently surprised a Russian defense establishment that had significant warning it was coming. That is not a description of a country being ground into submission. That is a description of a country doing something genuinely remarkable. The strike at Novorossiysk is one data point in that larger pattern. It is significant on its own terms. The logistics disruption, the revenue impact, the morale and information effects. But its deeper significance is as evidence that the asymmetric naval capability Ukraine has built is mature, effective, and continuing to evolve. Russia has no reliable answer to it. Its air defenses can be saturated. Its naval assets cannot be adequately protected. Its logistics infrastructure is exposed. Watch for Russian attempts to harden Novorossiysk infrastructure over the coming weeks, additional air defense deployments, changes in vessel dispersal patterns, possible reductions in the port's role as a military logistics hub. Watch for Ukrainian statements about what they targeted and why. Watch for satellite imagery analysis from the open-source community that will progressively fill in the damage picture over the next several weeks. And watch for the diplomatic responses, whether Turkey adjusts its Montreux Convention posture, whether NATO partners signal additional maritime support for Ukraine, and whether the Kremlin's public statements become more aggressive or more restrained as the domestic political pressure from this strike builds. This story is not finished. It is just getting to the part where the strategic consequences start revealing themselves. If you want to understand those consequences as they develop, subscribe to States News and turn on notifications. We will be here when the next piece of this picture falls into place.